Hello, everybody. Whiteboard Wednesdays with Werner, and today we are live. So we're going to just take a moment or two. We're waiting for one or two guys to still log in and get onto the session here. Just some housekeeping while we're at it. We're going to have a comment section. So whichever platform that you're on, please feel free to send us if there's some questions or anything like that. We'd really like to try and respond to them probably at the end of the live stream. It's our first one, so give us some slack. We might have one or two little glitches or things like that, or hiccups, but you know what? It's that's typical with anything that we do live. So the that we're going to be looking at is some of the NVIDIA technology that's been brought out to us roughly in about the March timeframe when they had their GTC. The first thing that we're going to look at is we're going to have a look at their brand new enterprise top-end, supercomputer GPU system that is built on the new Hopper technology. And then secondly, we're going to look at the comparison between the previous architecture, specifically in the DGX. Now, if you remember, the DGX is the NVIDIA premium platform, right? So this is their computer that they build, they design, and it really is all of the supercomputers that they build across the planet, right? So they always scale these DGXs out to meet whatever requirement they might have. So we're going to compare the previous Ampere architecture with the new Hopper one. So it's the A100 versus the H100. And then we have our last sections of our discussion is we're going to be introducing you to Adrian Wood, our Business Operations Director from Data Sciences Corporation. And we're going to ask him a couple of questions around, just where we are in South Africa with AI, what we're seeing in the market, and just, what we're looking at. So those are the topics. We're probably going to be around for about 15 minutes, maybe go on to 20 if there's any comments or questions. So it's not going to be too long. And we really thank you for joining us in this next 15 minutes and taking the time to be with us there. So let's get into it. I really want to start with this, and I have my pen around, so we might even do a little bit of whiteboarding. So the first thing that we're going to do is just talk about that H100 card, right? This is probably the pinnacle of NVIDIA's technology as it is at the moment. Now, if I just think back to 1993, when the first Pentium chip came out, this was magnificent back then. About 3.3 million transistors on that piece of silicon, and that was mind-blowing back in the day. Now, let's move on about 30 years. The H100 has 80 billion, yes, 80 billion transistors. Leave a comment on that if you remember what back in the day and what that means to you today, but that's really going to be something very special. So what we're looking at is absolutely the platinum standard when it comes to chip design. They're designing them in 4 nanometer spaces, and we really want to look at what they're doing with this. It's actually enhancing the performance and driving them. So what does it mean having this 80 billion transistors on this GPU? What do we actually have with it? What else have they done that's new? So there's two key things that NVIDIA have done that makes the H100 pretty unique. Now, when it comes to GPU calculations, you've obviously heard of floating point operations. So we always speak about teraflops or petaflops, and that's really just the speedometer for the actual GPU. How fast can we do things? So when we talk about 5 petaflops versus teraflops, it's really just the speed that it does those floating point operations at. And the floating point operation is process that, and that can go from something that is less specific, and it's basically at 8 versus going all the way up to 64-bit processing as well. So what they've done is they've created a transformer engine. What this allows the chips to actually do 2 different types of computations. So for instance, a less precise 8-bit computation versus a more precise 16-bit computation, and it allows the chip to decide when to apply that computation to the neural network model and how to do that in the most optimal fashion. So the utilization of those cores and the tens of cores way more efficient, and drives every inch of power from those engines that we have on that chip. So the first one then is that transformer engine. The second one is actually, in my mind, because what they've done is they've actually gone and created a security element to how the data moves between the CPU and the GPU. So what this refers to is confidentiality computing or confidential computing. Now, when we talk encryption, we're all familiar with the traditional forms, right? We have the first basic one, we have our data in a database, and when we encrypt, we can encrypt at rest. So while the data is not moving, we can apply an encryption algorithm to it, and that data is then secure, cannot breach it in any form or factor. Then the second one we kind of all know about is when we have encryption in transit, right? So that's basically the two traditional ways that we know about encryption. Now, think about this. When we have the GPU and the CPU, we actually at that very low level, and there's data moving between those two entities. Now, is they're actually encrypting the data while it's in use. So what they do at a hardware level is they're creating a transaction encryption environment that's basically this area over here that ensures that the data cannot be manipulated and used through the model. Now, why is this important? Well, there's quite a few ISVs out there. You think about everybody who's creating their IP, they're actually doing the models themselves, they're creating these neural networks, and then they place these out into the cloud, onto the edge, or into other computers. Now, anybody can actually try and get into those. So to stop the exploitation of that and the loss of the IP when it comes to these special models, NVIDIA have gone and created this encryption and use area, which is unique to the H100 that we see today. So transformer engine and the confidentiality compute are the two key new features. So now let's go on to our second portion, and that is looking at some of the kind of highlight speeds and feeds increase from the DGX A100 all the way up to the new fourth generation DGX H100. And the first one really is what we spoke about, is the petaflops, right? Is just context between these two. So the A100 version of the DGX, the Gen 3, could do 5 petaflops of AI compute, which is a phenomenal amount of compute power. Would you like to take a guess what the H100 is doing? Well, you can put them in the comments if you really feel like it, but I'm going to give you 32 petaflops. That's 5 times more. So basically, if we want to just, very basic, 5 DGX H100s in terms of compute power is the other way around. 5 A100s is now the equivalent of 1 H100 DGX. That is a huge amount of efficiency. When it comes to also the interlinking between the bandwidth that connects up the GPUs, that has gone up from 600 gigabits per second all the way up to 900. So that's a 33% increase over there. And also we know we need to move all of this data into the GPUs, right? So that bandwidth has grown from 500 gigabytes, which was on the old A100s, to 1 terabyte of bidirectional data transfer. That is a phenomenal amount. And this really builds us a system that gets us to that edge processing, or that high-end processing that we need, which is the trillion parameter processing power that we're looking for, specifically for big models such as neural language processing. Those have got parameters of about 530 billion parameters that we need to process. Now, just to kind of make this real, that big neural language that can help us to do translation, understand natural language, that model that we have to process, if we use the A100, it would take us about 7 days to actually train that model in every iteration. Using the DGX H100, that number is reduced to just 20 hours. This really makes it absolutely more powerful, makes it faster, and just better in terms of what type of data we can push through and get that feedback out. So that really wraps up the first 2 portions that we had today, talking about the H1 in terms of GPU, and there we spoke about the transformer engine and also the confidentiality compute that we actually highlighted there, and then just the comparison between the 2 DGX versions that we have. So now what we'd like to do is actually introduce our guest speaker.
Hey Werner, how's it going?
Finding you.
Talk on the show?
Absolutely. So, guys, who we have here is Adrian Wood. He is our business operations director for Data Sciences Corporation, and we just want to, ask one or two questions, get Adrian's view on where we are at the moment within the South African state on this. But Adrian, perhaps feedback as to what is happening with NVIDIA at the moment. What are they doing when it comes to AI? And just how you see that world coming together for the application of AI and NVIDIA technologies.
Yeah, well, I mean, the first thing, NVIDIA is doing amazing things. Talking about 80 billion transistors. Does that chip come with and mustard? It's huge balance. Every time we see something coming out of GDC, it's always incredibly fascinating. And also, the market is changing so rapidly, and we're seeing a lot of focus coming to AI. So, the key thing, I guess, with NVIDIA is that they not only show off or showcase the technology from a hardware perspective, but also the key thing is around enablement through various software platforms that they have and offer out to the community, which is about the ability to actually utilize this processing power incredibly well. And in terms of that, what's also quite interesting is that their money with there was an article that they published around how they're using AI on their own GPU technology to make their GPU form factors and silicon more effective, more efficient, reducing design times, come to market, manufacturing precision. It's actually quite incredible that they're actually doing what they say they're doing for the market.
They're eating their own dog food. They're applying the technology themselves to gain an advantage in that market.
Exactly. Right? which is great. It's one thing, marketing the product, but it's when you're using it yourself, I think it's quite important.
Yeah.
But that kind of brings me to the second thing, which is really around, what the vision or what the view of NVIDIA is around where it's coming from. So they kind of talk about the 5 waves of AI. The first being what they call the Big Bang, which was really around the theoretical, logic around AI and what it meant, and being able to really take that and manipulate that and compute it. Back in the good old days,
it was the start of it, right?
Research, kind of, the academia side of it. They then talk about the next step really forward was around cloud providers using AI technology to extend their market. They talk about Meta and Google and those type of capabilities. So there was cloud. The next phase or the next wave they talk about is enterprise, which is where we see ourselves going in the future.
Absolutely.
It's really around enabling industry or business to leverage AI to make themselves more competitive, more efficient, allowing them to gain advantage over their competitors. So that's level 3. The fourth wave is really around taking the ability, especially with the advent to what they call the edge, so taking AI into the edge out of the data center. And then the last wave is really around autonomy, which is conceptually where machines can do things without humans. So the autonomous driver or the autonomous car or airplane, things like that. So they talk about these 5 waves, and I guess it's really around maturity. Different organizations or different markets are at in terms of AI. So that's kind of what they talk about. And obviously from our perspective, the third wave is quite important, is around how are enterprises, how are they leveraging AI specifically in South Africa.
That's really where NVIDIA have done so well, is they've reduced the barriers of entry into the GPU market and the AI market by creating this ecosystem, of not just hardware, which is obviously very, very good, but they've also delved into creating a software suite that complements that hardware and allows organizations to, very, very quickly kind of create a launch pad into AI, and do those type of things, right?
I think what they're doing is they appreciate, they understand that the fact that, the hardware is key to the ability to process information. But obviously the ability to leverage that is quite things like Morpheus, which is really around no trust and security, enabling that platform for organizations to leverage, also to the Omniverse, creating your kind of your twin digital twins. Those are kind of realize, just providing the hardware is not good enough anymore, and to enable organizations to leverage, multi-petaflops of processing capability, you need the software capability to come with it. And I think that's what they've done incredibly well. It's not just about focusing on chip design, it's about how do you leverage that, leverage that capability going forward.
All pertinent points, and I think that's where they really absolutely streets ahead of their traditional competition, is building that ecosystem. So maybe what do we let's bring it back home in the South African context. We've gone and had a few chats with quite a few around this particular area, around what they're doing around AI. What's been your experience? Perhaps you can give the audience a bit of insight into that market and what's actually happening in terms of the enterprises here.
Okay, thanks, Werner. Yeah, I mean, it is quite interesting. I think, if you look at those 5 ways, it's almost like a maturity level. And is that, we are engaging with customers which are at different parts of that maturity level. So we have some organizations who are already struggling to understand what is AI, what does it mean to them. It's kind of like a discussion point at the excos, but it's not really a strategic direction. Then we get the other side of the spectrum. These companies, they see that to enter into competitive market, one way that they can get this advantage is to use artificial intelligence to provide a better service or a better technology or a better product. And they invest heavily into artificial intelligence as a primary strategic policy. I would say that a lot of the large organizations we're dealing with, they are really struggling to get their head around what is AI, what does it mean from their business, how can they get efficiencies. They have lots of data, they don't really understand what that data can do for them. And generally what we're seeing is that in a lot of the enterprise businesses where they're looking at data scientists, or they have a couple of data scientists, but they don't really have a strategic alignment with the business. But there is 1 or 2 companies that we have spoken to where they have had data scientist competency for several years now. They've invested a lot of money into the technology to drive. We see that those companies definitely are offering different ways to market, different products, and are definitely gaining bigger market share because of that, because of their agility and their ability to be more focused on the consumer.
Yeah, I think what we've also seen is that in some of the other, definitely evidence of shadow IT or shadow AI that's happening. So what we'll find is that there's kind of pockets of excellence or pockets of forward thinking that's starting to play with this, but it's very ad hoc, not very structured, and not leveraging the efficiencies of like a shared platform or finding full access to the data. So we know for AI we need the data, we need the data scientist, and we need the processing power, right? And they're trying to figure out how to harmonize those 3. And some of them are missing that a little bit.
Yeah, I think so. I think definitely there's this want. There's one to become sort of AI compliant or leverage it, but there's sometimes the uncertainty of how to do that.
Yeah, exactly.
And we definitely seen that in the market.
So what we've been saying is really to the audience is that the market is there, the opportunity is there. I think nobody is really disputing that. But how to harness that would really mean to find some form of strategy that's at a ESCO level, and basically starting to look at what this means for the business as a strategic endeavor, and aligning the resources or looking at where the gaps are in those resources and bringing those together.
I think definitely that's what we're seeing is really understanding that having disparate data scientists working on certain business units is not really driving the ultimate goal. So they're combining those, pulling those together, creating a center of excellence for the business, and using that as its own business unit to drive ideas and concepts and how to align strategically with an AI vision and an adoption of AI.
Yeah, perfect. Well, I think that covers kind of the points that we wanted to discuss.
I believe so, yes. I think it's exciting stuff. I mean, the GTC is always very, very good. If you haven't followed it, there's some great videos. There's a data center. I definitely suggest you have a look at that one. It's really, really, really good.
Yeah.
But really fascinating stuff coming out of the GTCs, out of NVIDIA, and I think out of the community that supports it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what the key thing here is to go and look at these, what's being done, and find the inspiration, actually translate and be applied in your own business, and see where the opportunities are lying.
Excellent.
Thank you very much, Adrian. I think what we're going to do is have a look and see if there's any comments. I don't know if we've seen anything that's come up yet. so far the audience has been very, very quiet, which is good. You're probably in an area where you can't actually say much, and that is, we fully understand what's happening there. So what we're going to do is, if there's any more comments, please still put them down. The video will be going on, onto our links. You'll be able to kind of, watch that on demand. And we really thank you so much for your time joining us here, and we look forward to our next live stream. In the meantime, thank you very much and goodbye.
Bye.